As I was looking for ideas for a video that would be suitable for the spooky month, there were two games that caught my eye. Gone Home is a game that I've never really cared for. That's not exactly a surprise, it's a love it or hate it experience. Typically people who don't like it have two main complaints with it. Number one, they don't like it because it's mechanically simple, which is what I thought the problem was my first time playing it. But the other game I'm going to talk about, Anatomy, is even simpler. But I enjoyed that a lot, so clearly that can't be what made me bounce off of the game. Number two, the game sells itself as a horror game, or at least a mystery game, when it really isn't. This is, I think, closer to being what actually gets in my way of enjoying Gone Home. But it's not really a complete answer. If it was, then knowing not to expect a horror or mystery would be enough to engage with the game on its own terms. But even after changing my expectations, I don't like Gone Home because it still insists on using horror tropes to the detriment of the narrative it's actually trying to tell. That's why I wanted to compare it with Anatomy, since alongside being the game that made me realize I don't mind minimal mechanics, it uses the conventions of its genre to benefit its story, while Gone Home almost seems afraid to. I'm gonna have to give a spoiler warning here. I didn't give one in my other videos because knowing the story before playing the game wouldn't change your experience going in. As much as I like Sekiro and Mirror's Edge, I wouldn't tell someone to play them just for the story, and even after you know it, there are still other parts of the game. For Anatomy and Gone Home, the story is all there is. Knowing it ahead of time is definitely going to change the experience. Gone Home can be found in most digital stores for around $15. I think that's a tad expensive for the experience given, so get it on sale if you can. Just know that this video is going to spoil almost everything in it. Anatomy is only $3 and can be completed in under an hour, so just go play it and come back to finish the video. I'll even put a link to it in the description. It's worth it, so just go play it. Alright, I'm going to assume that you've played both games or are fine with them being spoiled. So let's get to the comparison. The setup to a story is one of the most important parts of the whole structure. It establishes the genre, tone, and usually the main character. This is what sets up the expectations of the whole narrative, and for a great story, it also sets up payoff that comes back in the conclusion. Let's take a look at how Gone Home handles its setup. Gone Home begins with Katie, who will be our player character, leaving a message to her mom that she's coming back from Europe on June 6th at midnight, and that she'll get a shuttle so she won't need to be picked up. The message ends, and ominous music plays as the title fades in from a black screen. When it fades out, we see the date and time of arrival fade in. June 7th, 1995, 1:15 a.m. The time and date fades to Katie standing on the porch of the house. There's a downpour of rain outside, and a note on the door from Katie's sister Sam, apologizing that it's impossible for her to see Katie, and to not look for her. This setup has a bunch of potential that the game will then proceed to ignore. Our first introduction is to Katie, but our player character is ultimately irrelevant to the story that is going to be told. Even the side characters will get more development than her. She could have been anyone. If she was just a family friend that Sam was really fond of, nothing would really change. Her parents have put her trophies on display in the main entrance of a house she's never been to. This seems to be implying that Katie is the favorite child and Sam has been living in that shadow. That breaks down when we consider that this is the only thing we learn about Katie. What will be her room is still packed, so while the rest of the family have areas that build on their individual arcs, Katie doesn't. Katie doesn't have an arc. She went to Europe to escape from the way her family seemed to be imploding, only to come back to find it having fallen apart. She's back, but everyone else is gone. So it's a tragedy where you try to figure out why your family has torn itself apart. Except not really. Her parents are out of town on a couples retreat, and are returning that day. Sam literally just left the house before she got in. We'll get to both of those later when talking about the other characters. It's odd that they give Katie a place in the family, something that should make her a main character, and emphasize the separation between her and the player just to do nothing with it. Either way, the voice of the story is Sam, so the game would have been better off starting with a message from her leading into the story, not Katie. The darkness and rain combine with a note on the door to suggest there's a dramatic mystery to be discovered, possibly dark secrets buried in the depths of the family's house. There's not. Okay, there kind of is. There's a buried subplot that the house might actually be haunted, but it mostly acts as a part of Sam's plot. Any direct hints at spooky things happening are immediately and completely explained as something mundane. The subversion does nothing to help the story, as tension that might have been building up is thoroughly destroyed after the second time it happens, and at this point the story should drop any pretenses, but it staunchly refuses to. This isn't dark and stormy night murder mystery with a tragic ending. It's sun setting at the end of summer, coming of age with an, at worst, bittersweet loss of innocence ending. There's even a recording from Sam that talks about how sunlight filters through the windows of the house at the end of the day. and laments about how Katie won't get to see it. How much more poignant would it have been for Katie to have been able to see it only after Sam had left? The potential was there, but was completely wasted on atmosphere for an entirely different story. In comparison, Anatomy opens with you already in the house in the dark. You have just enough light around your character to see the walls of the house when you get close. You can explore the house a bit, but all the doors are locked. VHS lines will scroll down your screen as you're guided into the back of the house, where you'll find a tape and a player in the kitchen, and the first message is on the importance of the house, more than all other structures that humans have created, even emphasizing the house is what humans rely on most completely. Then you're told to pick up the next tape. There's no music at all as you move through the house, and the only sounds are the ones you cause, like trying to open the doors. The dark atmosphere isn't there just because of the horror genre, but because the house itself has long been abandoned. It's a classic trope, but it's not used without reason. The VHS lines are there to aid in the feeling of things being off without any of the horror elements that are going to be brought in later. Most importantly, the recording builds on the significance of the house, how it's something that we put so much fundamental trust in without even thinking about it. The horror tropes merge with this message to tell us this house cannot be trusted, while also subtly building up sympathy for the payoff at the end. We've raised the question subconsciously of what could bring our most trusted structure to betray us. The player and the character are treated as one and the same, and are referenced by the word you. The game is doing as much as it can to eliminate the separation between the player and the player character. There's not much emphasis at the start, but it's important that it builds it up now to have the payoff be satisfying at the end. Anatomy being a shorter game means there's less to the setup, but not a bit of it is wasted. It uses the standard tropes of the genre, but it works because each of those tropes feeds back into the story that the developer is trying to tell, which is a horror story. These tropes are sometimes dismissed as cliches, but their use isn't the actual problem. The problem comes from using them carelessly without understanding how they affect the story. They become used so often because when used right, they make the story being told that much stronger, and sets the expectation for the upcoming experience, which is needed to have a satisfying payoff at the end of the narrative. It's not a problem to use them, it's a problem to not know why you're using them. The setup for both of these games is very similar, but they really shouldn't be. Neither would lead you to believe you were going to be told a love story played completely straight, but that's what you get out of Gone Home. It doesn't just extend to the setup, but the environment itself. The houses in both games are just as much characters as anyone else. The only real character in Anatomy's case, but we'll get to that. The mechanics are there in both games to facilitate exploring the environment. For Anatomy, opening doors and turning on the TV are about as much as you can do outside of putting tapes in the player. Gone Home lets you pick up most items in the house, turn lights on and off, and play with the faucets. You can turn most items around to see it from every side, and this forms the basis of how you'll experience the story of the family. The developers of Gone Home make it very clear that they're fans of immersive sims. From System Shock to Bioshock, they even have the first combination you need to use be 0451, a shout out to the work of Looking Glass Studios. Exploring through the house is actually my favorite part of the game. The slow unraveling of the individual stories and how they interconnect is fun, and while I think the stories fall flat more often than not, I enjoyed the method it's told in. Sam's no Shodan, but who is? That's not a point against the game. The layout of the house is well considered. Each area is designed to tell you a specific portion of the story, with the rooms most occupied by a certain character revealing the most about that character. The house in Anatomy, by contrast, is a lot simpler. There are plates in the dining room you can break and a TV in the living room, but it's not filled with objects you can pick up and turn around. There are paintings on the wall to unnerve the player. They either reference your intrusion as a parasite in the house, or are anatomical diagrams referencing the theme of the game. There's not much here, but everything that is here is in service to the game. My original plan was to describe the environment separately, then focus on the characters, but there was so much repetition that I had to change the script here. Instead, I'll go through Gone Home by character and focus on each room as they come up in the character's arc. At the end, I'll compare it as a whole to how Anatomy deals with its arc. I'll start with Gone Home going from least important characters to most important. I'm only going to deal with the family that has been living in the house because everyone else is just there to support their arcs anyway. Janice Greenbrier is the mother of the Greenbrier family. The parts of her story are even more scattered than the rest of the characters, with only one room really dedicated exclusively to her, and it's actually pretty empty of any revelations. It looks nice, the devs compare it to Rapture, but I'm not sure that's enough of a justification for what amounts to empty space when the only interaction with these characters is what we find in the house. As for her arc, she begins with a troubled relationship with Terrence. the father of Katie and Sam. There are signs she tried to connect with him to help make things better, but the events were things like couples bowling. I'm working with scraps of paper to piece some of this out. My best understanding is that Janice is the one who originally realized they needed to work on their marriage, but only suggested things that she enjoyed. Terrence is a writer, and it's likely that a noisy outing like bowling wouldn't actually be appealing, but I can't really read more into that given the limited amount of information to work with. Either way, this approach doesn't work, and she focuses on her work with the forestry service. She gets a crush on a new employee there named Rick that one of her friends describes as a flannel-clad hunk. I can only imagine him as the brawny paper towel guy. I blame The Simpsons.
Fantasize, Marge. Fantasize about Burley.
We find out he has a girlfriend when he sends Janice an invitation to a concert, and she projects her own relationship troubles on them. At least, I assume, because I'm having to fill in the cracks, and this is the most charitable read I can get. Rick uses her infatuation to get a promotion, but ends the crush when he proposes to his girlfriend, her parents sending a wedding invitation to Janice and Terrence. They kept the invitation on the fridge and had the day marked on the calendar, but when we find the calendar, it's scratched out and replaced with an anniversary trip, which is actually a couple's retreat. If that seemed like it turned around fast, then you're not alone. This is a problem that most of the character arcs have. There is a progression of story here, a chain of events happening along a span of time, but the narrative format doesn't seem to be fully fleshed out, and the missing piece for Janice and Terrence is the final epiphany at the end of what we could consider Act 2 of these arcs. We have the problem established, we have a moment of hopelessness or weakness, but then the problem is solved as if by divine intervention. It's a serious letdown for the characters since it comes off as them having no agency in their lives. Terrence fares a little better, but that's only because of how much he has scattered around the house. Since Sam and Lonnie are essentially one person, he can be considered the secondary character. He is the author of the best-selling pulp fiction novels The Accidental Savior and The Accidental Pariah. At the start of his arc, interest in his novels has waned and he is desperately trying to recreate his original success. One of the first rooms is his study, where we see his typewriter set up with an ad he was typing before, trying to put more narrative in it. Next to the typewriter are sticky notes about the book he's trying to write. Emphasized in the center are the words, "You can do better." At first, what seems to be harsh self-criticism is actually a reflection of how his father's dismissive words have stuck with him and are eating at his confidence. Here we can see a bit of a breakdown in how the story is told. All of this is past tense. This challenge has already been overcome. There's no reason for him to be trying to type out an ad with a story. That's something to do early on to establish characterization, but the environment implies it's something he's actively working on. There's also a crumpled copy of the manuscript for his third book taken out of the trash with the words, "Don't give up on this," written by his wife. But you can find the completed version, The Accidental Human, and find notes showing that cover copies have already been sent out to a publishing company. For me, this makes the setup of the environment break down. It's supposed to help you unfold the story of the characters, but the environment has to bend itself around still telling the story linearly. People don't use houses like this, which is bad news for a game selling itself on the realism of the house. Oh, and that publishing company? They approached Terrence. These characters have no agency of their own. Changes only come from outside the family. The family itself is static. This could maybe be used if we were telling a tragic story, but no, that's not what the story is trying to be. The story is just missing huge pieces for me to find it compelling. But these are just side characters, right? The story's not about them. It's about Sam. Well, about Sam. By which I mean about Lonnie. Because when she's introduced, she consumes the narrative. I get that this is supposed to be a love story, but given we are shown only a narrow view of the other character's perspective of their relationship, it's hard to stay grounded in the story. And when they portray it in a negative light, the narrative is just shy of outright stating they are in the wrong. Have you ever known someone that was stuck in the honeymoon phase of a new relationship? That's what this is like.
Lonnie. And Lonnie, and Lonnie in my old spot.
Even followed by a melodramatic breakup, which I need to emphasize is caused by Lonnie joining the military, putting her out of contact for a few months for basic training. Sam and Lonnie treat it like it'll be forever, but it's 3 months, and they're not willing to wait for that. On its own, I can understand Lonnie deciding that the military isn't for her, given the whole Riot Girl rocker thing she has going, but the focus is on how it affects their relationship, rather than growing from her own character. I don't mind the focus on the relationship, but there's no nuance here. Either other characters need to vocalize their thoughts about the relationship, or Sam needed to expand her thoughts outside of Lonnie. Even getting more of Lonnie's perspective on things would have helped. As it is, we end the game with Lonnie going AWOL, and Sam running away from the house after stealing all the VCRs to sell. Anything that might come after that is the player filling in the gaps. If you were able to get invested in the narrative, I imagine that it could feel refreshing being able to decide what comes next for the family. For me, it left me cold, without a sense of resolution. To tie it back into the theme of this video, what would be changed by embracing the genre conventions of a love story? Well, to start with, Lonnie is already something of a manic pixie dream girl. A trope I know a lot of people don't like, but I don't really mind. The trick to using the character is that, 1, they need to improve the life of the main character by making it more interesting, which Gone Home does, and 2, they need development outside the character they're in a relationship with. Modern takes on the trope typically have said character upset if they think they're just being used for the main character's benefit. There's even a good place to put it already in the story. When Lonnie is going away, she performs one final concert, with the last song dedicated to Sam, who leaves the concert sobbing. Lonnie says she was just trying to make her happy, and Sam replies, "I don't think you can anymore." This is a great place for the two to sit down and have a back and forth with what they both wanted out of the relationship. Maybe Lonnie gets upset about only being valued as long as Sam sees her as the ideal girl. Or maybe she responds that she's trying, but Sam's been treating her coldly since she found out she was going to basic training. Just something. Some interaction between the two that makes them their own characters. But no, this is from Sam's diary, so it's just, "I don't think you can anymore." And that's it. No response from Lonnie, no character development, just a huge missed opportunity. Of course, this being limited because it's from the diary is pretty arbitrary. Sam's a writer, she could have easily recorded the whole conversation. I'm sure Lonnie would have had a follow-up. Even better would have been to have a recording of the conversation. They both have voice actors, even if only Sam really gets speaking roles. Another thing that would help, and I think this is the biggest, is that Lonnie needs things outside of her and Sam together in the house. They can be about Sam, but they need to be from Lonnie's perspective and separate from the notes that are direct interactions between the two. Maybe they take the form of her leaving written notes on scraps of papers for her music left around the house. She won't have a dedicated set of rooms like the rest of the family, but she's spent a substantial amount of time in the house, and Sam's parents clearly don't care for her. There's a character dynamic here that we never see from Lonnie's perspective, when we really need to. In comparison, Anatomy has one character, the house. You'll go through the house 3 times. The first time is a sort of guided tour while the tape plays messages comparing the anatomy of a house to that of a human. Here, the house is a passive thing. The recordings play out from a detached third-person perspective. The standard horror tropes are doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. The abandoned house, the spooky photos, the crackling voice. It's there to put the player on edge, and it works because the game delivers on the promise of the intro. If the game stopped on the first run, then it wouldn't be anything special. Just another indie horror game for the pile. That's why it's important that that's where it starts, and it's why it's important that there's even more waiting. The first playthrough ends by sending you to the master bedroom, hyping it as the waking mind, the most frightening place of all. Once you're there, you have the first act of the house as an entity, blocking your exit with the final tape saying, "No, the master bedroom isn't a mind, it's a mouth, ready to betray you at any time, just needing to bite down." The second time, things are just subtly off in most of the house. The mirror in the bathroom floats off the wall. While the messages are corrupted, some parts are still able to be made out. Phrases like "the house," "dissection," and "sympathy." Black lines break through the walls of the bedroom like veins. The tapes get clearer as you go through. One of the clearest tapes to hear in this section, once again breaks down the anatomy of the house, suggesting it's a creature capable of, before being cut off. The last one talks again about the master bedroom, in dreams, but before it ends, the house takes over the tape, talking for the first time in an active voice. It dreams of teeth, growing and taking over every part of it, before telling the story of a vandal it pushed off the stairs to the basement, who it then devoured. The last message ends with the narrator allowed to speak again, just to say, the basement is dark. And suddenly, you understand that you, as an intruder, represent everything the house hates. Every good thing that left, and every hateful thing that intrudes in it. If the game had ended there, it would have been a good story. The third and final time through the house twists in on itself. The light is now blood red. Black lines pierce through the walls. Objects are moved or corrupted. When you turn on the TV, you see the words, "You never came back." The word hurt appears, and you wonder if it is for you, or the house. The tapes themselves are garbled beyond comprehension, until you once again get to the tape about dissecting the house. Dreams, memories, and a mouth that will bite down. You are led into the basement, Now the house talks again, this time directly to you. When the house is both hungry and awake, every room becomes a mouth. Here we have the advantage of having no separation between the player and the player character. You are the intruder, and you have woken an old and hungry house. If the story ended there, it would have been an excellent take on the horror genre. When you load the game again, you once again see the message, "You never came back," followed by what I can only suppose is the true stomach of the house. Load one final time, and you hear the house wistfully talking to itself. What happens to a house when it is left alone?
What happens to a house when it is left alone? When it becomes worn and aged? When its paint peels and its foundations begin to sink? When it goes for too long unlived in? What does it think of? What does it dream? How does it regard those creatures who built it, brought it into existence only to abandon it when its usefulness no longer satisfies them? It may grow lonesome. It may stare for long hours into the darkness of its own empty halls and see shadows, and its heart may jump as it thinks, here is someone again, I'm not alone. And each time it is wrong, and the hurt starts over. It may haunt itself, inventing ghosts to walk its floors, making friends with its shadow puppets, laughing and whispering to itself at the end of some quiet cul-de-sac. It may grow angry. Its basement may fill with churning acid like an empty stomach, and its gorge may rise as it asks itself through clenched teeth, what did I do wrong? It may grow bitter. It may grow hungry. So hungry and so bitter that its scruples dissolve and its doors unlock themselves. While a house may hunger, it cannot starve. And so, in fever and anger and loneliness, it may simply lie in wait. Doors open, shades drawn, hallways empty, hungry.
The house's final speech is masterfully written, and it is absolutely heartbreaking. You, as a character, were never real. You were a figment the house created to deal with all the loneliness. A ghost it invented to torment because it was helpless to do anything else. The house is a sad, abandoned old thing, and it can't even ask why. Each loop has had its own form of payoff. Early on, we established the themes of dissection and anatomy, alongside sympathy and betrayal. The first loop plays the resolution to the expectations straight, with a somewhat stock ending. The themes are repeated and emphasized in the second ending, with a better payoff for a solid horror story. The third time, though, is where the elements of tragedy leak through. Tragedy isn't unusual in horror. The best horror stories have some layer of tragedy in them, but it's not until you load the game again that it starts to sink in that the tragedy isn't yours and the betrayal isn't from the house. We start with discussing how a house is the most important and most personal structure humans create, and we end with the house talking about how lonely it is to be abandoned. This is why genre convention is so important. I'm not saying that stories should be locked into one theme or to only try one thing, but I am saying that your audience will come in with expectations, and at least starting with genre conventions will help ground them and set their expectations to match the story you're trying to tell. You don't have to use them, but you do have to be aware of them, because if you're not, you can be setting up your audience for disappointment. If you do it right, though, you can create something truly memorable. Thanks again for watching my video. Did Gone Home work for you? What did you think of Anatomy? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe if you don't mind, or maybe check out some of my other videos. October was a bit rough for me, so if you can spare some change, check out my Patreon. $10 patrons get a shout out at the end of the videos, and all patrons get access to ad-free videos. See y'all next time.